Just waiting for some more folks to join us, and we will be started very shortly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Aloha and good evening, everyone. My name is Devon Ward. I am Senior Legislative Counsel at the Marijuana Policy Project. Marijuana Policy Project has been working to end cannabis prohibition and improve cannabis policy for over 25 years. And I'm so happy you could join us for this timely discussion of SB 669, an act related to cannabis. Now, before we get into the specifics of the bill, I want to bring on Representative Janae Capella to provide some insights into where we are in the legislative process in the session right now, now that the bill is crossed over from the Senate to the House. So I'd like to bring Representative Capella. Representative Capella, thank you so much for joining us. Just to do a brief intro, as many of you know, Representative Capella represents the House District number 5 on the Hawaii Island. She's the first woman and the first Native Hawaiian to represent that district. I think that's very important in light of this being Women's History Month. She currently serves as the Vice Chair of the Higher Education Committee and is a member of the Education, Culture, Arts, and International Affairs and Labor and Government Operations Committee. Representative Capella, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Devon.
Yeah,
it's very appreciated, and I love the opportunity to be able to talk about this incredibly important issue.
Thanks so much. So just to kick it off, can you give us some context about where we are in the legislative session at this point? I know, Senate just had a big vote last week, bunch of bills crossed over. So kind of where are we in the kind of marathon that is the legislative session?
Thank you for the question. We're finally at the crossover point, what we refer to as crossover. So when all the bills, whether they've originated in the House or they've originated in the Senate, they have to have been heard and crossed over to the opposite chamber to go through the same process once again in the opposite chamber before we finally meet for conference week. So we're finally at that crossing point. All of the House bills are now in the Senate, and most importantly, SB 669 is now in the House. As many of you know, that is the vehicle that's moving that allows recreational cannabis use in the state of Hawaii. It's also the largest, if passed, it does hold some of the social equity components, but most importantly, it also holds the mass expungement program that was in the original bill that you and I, Devon, and a number of other individuals from the task force that was created last year worked on. Those expungement pieces are included in this new bill that's moving over SB 669. So now it will have to be heard by the House. And so there's lots of opportunities, I think, for people to be able to message their legislators, specifically those that are on the committees that would first be hearing SB 669. So if you have an interest in having this legislation heard, I would definitely suggest reaching out to some of the legislators that sit on that committee and pushing the idea.
Yeah, I think you kind of covered it all really quickly right there. But I guess lastly, you mentioned the bill you sponsored, SB or I forget the House number, but you sponsored legalization bill that was incorporated into 669. I guess what are your thoughts on 669 as it stands right now, and kind of where do you think it measures up? Do you think it's an important bill? Do you think that there are parts that could be improved? Do you think it's fine as is? Where do you think it kind of stands now that it's been through at least one chamber?
I think 669 is this incredible compromise bill, right? It shows that we can all work together to come up with a bill that really meets the needs, I think, of medical patients, but it also protects small cannabis farms and hopefully the people that will potentially be able to join into a robust legalization system. I think one of the biggest issues when we're looking at creating recreational cannabis use here in the state is how do we uplift and protect our medical patients, but also how do we protect the future individuals who are going to be taking part in this industry. And I think that this bill, while many people say it's not perfect, no bill is perfect, I think that it's a really good starting point for us. And most importantly for me, it has some of those social equity components. I think as legislators, we have a responsibility to enact systemic solutions that promote social justice. And any bill that's going to be about recreational cannabis use has to have social equity at its heart. Ending mass incarceration and establishing the biggest mass expungement program ever seen on our shores here in Hawaii is exactly the kind of systemic solutions that we should be pursuing. And I think that this bill takes a crack at that. And that's really fantastic. Of course, there's always things that we can do to make things better, and that's a part of the legislative process. So, one of the things that I would say to anyone who wants to get involved in in this process is to message your legislators, tell them the things you like, things that you don't like. Be very clear and concise. I think that there's a lot of misinformation floating around on social media, specifically around this bill. And I think it's really important to be able to provide really informative and evidence-based information that is delivered in a kind and collaborative way. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to win this battle by throwing stones. We're going to win this by really working together to create a program that is really going to uplift Hawaii and change the narrative around this around cannabis use for generations to come.
Awesome. Well, I know you got to run. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us and kicking this this timely discussion off. And we just appreciate your advocacy on this issue and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you so much, Devon. Thanks for having me. Aloha.
Yeah. Aloha. All right. Before we jump into our next guest, I do want to take an opportunity to walk through kind of a brief summary of the bill. And just really share, what's actually in this bill, and maybe dispel a little bit of some of the myths that may be out there or misunderstandings about the bill. And so, I know the legislative process in Hawaii moves fairly fast, and this bill has been altered a couple of times. And so, the version that's up here in the corner is a summary of the SD2 that passed out of the last committee in the Senate and was voted on in the Senate. And so, what the bill does is it limits personal use to 1 ounce by a person 21 years or older. And we're going to have a deeper dive on what personal use is defined as in the bill, but we'll get into that later. It allows the transfer, transport, and display of 1 ounce and makes that immune from criminal prosecution. This is a really big one, and in my experience, it's been a really contentious one. Policy feature in a number of states is it allows the possession of 6 plants, no more than 3 maturing, where the plants are grown in a locked enclosed space, not available for sale by adults. And so that's a really important provision to allow adults over 21 to be able to cultivate cannabis. The bill prohibits cannabis use on highways, public sidewalks, federal property, and any location where smoking or alcohol is prohibited. And that's very important for public safety and quality of life. We don't want folks operating impaired on our roadways, and we don't want folks smoking in our beaches and our public places. We do want folks to consume in permissible spaces. I mentioned this before, but I'll highlight again. It allows adults 21 and over to gift cannabis within legal limits, and it allows the possession, transport, purchase of cannabis accessories. And it eliminates the personal use of cannabis as the basis for search, arrest, or asset forfeiture, which is a huge one. The license and regulatory structure, which I know has been the conversation of a lot of talk, and know that it needs work. I know we submitted a ton of comments to try to improve this section, but what the bill does currently is it establishes the Hawaii Cannabis Regulatory Authority. It's set to be an independent agency that's going to oversee all cannabis use, including medical. It envisions transitioning the medical program out of the Department of Health into this new authority. The authority is going to be led by an executive director appointed by the governor. So that's actually a process that's very similar to how Hawaii appoints agency heads currently. And so they'll be appointed by the governor. And as I mentioned before, all of the Department of Health's duties related to the Office of Medical Cannabis and Enforcement are going to be transferred. And also the agency is going to be required to report annually to the governor and the legislature on the regulation of cannabis establishments. And I think that's an important oversight function. We're hoping to add in some more commissioners, some folks that are appointed by the legislature with specific expertise in particular areas that are related to the regulation of cannabis, and that's something we're advocating for, and we think would be a good improvement in addition to this section of the bill. The regulatory powers of the agency, these are just a few of them, but the agency is going to be charged with deciding which applicants are going to be awarded licenses. They'll be given the authority to deny applications, limit them, condition their approval, revoke or suspend licenses. They're also charged with developing the methodology and the process for awarding licenses. They're allowed to conduct investigations into the qualification of applicants. They're allowed to impose fees, sanctions, and penalties. They're allowed to do inspections. They're allowed to review market data. So they have a host of powers to be able to regulate the cannabis industry at large here in Hawaii. So this is a really important section. This is the license types. So what the bill does is it establishes 4 license types, and I'll run through them really quickly. The cannabis cultivation facilities, which are authorized to cultivate, process, prepare, label, and transport. Transport was actually added to the bill, and package cannabis products for sale to retail or to dual-use facilities. You have a retail cannabis license, which allows folks to purchase, take possession of cannabis from a cultivation facility or a dual-use dispensary and sell to consumers on a specific premise. You have a cannabis testing facility, which authorizes folks to develop, research, test cannabis products. And you have a dual-use cannabis license, which is authorized to cultivate, process, manufacture, transport, sell cannabis for both medical and personal use, and to take possession of cannabis from a cultivation or other dispensaries, and also transfer cannabis to retail stores. The agency that we talked about, the authority, also has the ability to establish additional license types and grant temporary licenses as well, which, you know, I think there are some other licenses like on-site consumption and delivery licenses that could also be included, but aren't expressly spelled out in the bill, but aren't limited because the agency has the ability to add more license types. The next section is the expungement section, which we're going to touch on, but I think it's really been beefed up a ton through the last committee process. And so currently the bill says that records relating to the arrest, criminal charge, or conviction of a person for any act permitted under the bill. And so that's legal possession, that's transferring, that's gifting, that's also sales. So, and it specifically says, including the possession or distribution of marijuana, shall be ordered expunged in the following manner. And so it mandates that by December 25th, or excuse me, December 31st of 2025, the Attorney General and the judiciary will finalize what offenses are eligible for expungement. The county attorneys will then issue notices to all folks who are eligible. And then at the top of January 1st, 2026, the Attorney General will order the automatic expungement of the records of the arrests, criminal charges, and convictions of the cannabis offenses. And that's an automatic process. There's no fee attached to it. And I think the gap is typical because the state needs some time to kind of get that automatic system up and running. But I think it's a remarkable piece in that it allows for the expungement of sales and possession charges, and it doesn't have an express limit in the law of the amount, which is pretty fantastic. And we're going to talk more about with Last Prisoner Project. But aside from the automatic process, there's also this petition process that would start July 1st, 2023. It would allow somebody convicted of possession or distribution to petition themselves before the automatic process. They can petition the court for a review and adjustment of their sentence, and the bill also orders that expungement orders are going to be sealed. And with that expungement, you're allowed to say on applications for employment that you haven't been convicted of a crime if the cannabis offense is your only crime once it's expunged. The only exception to that is if you're applying to be an attorney in the state of Hawaii, you're an applicant for a teaching certificate or the operator of an early childhood facility. And the custodian of records is not allowed to disclose, your arrest, your charges, except for in the instance of bar admission. So that's kind of a brief kind of review of the expungement pieces. And so next, I want to bring on Nikos Leverance of Drug Policy Forum Hawaii to talk to us a little bit about this bill. Just a brief introduction on Nikos. Nikos serves as the president of the board of Drug Policy Forum Hawaii. Drug Policy Forum Hawaii, they've been working since 1993 to encourage alternatives to the failed war on drugs. Nikos also serves as the grants and advancement manager for Hawaii Health Harm Reduction Center. Nikos, thank you so much for joining us.
Mahalo, Devon. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to speak with you about this bill and about cannabis reform generally, specifically how this bill can be improved potentially to increase personal liberties, social equity, and those things that will really kickstart what should be a robust conversation in at least the next few weeks, one hopes.
For sure. So I want to walk through, we touched on it a little bit. I want to walk through the personal liberty provisions of the bill with you. And so if enacted, SB 669, it would legalize possession up to 1 ounce, allow adults 21 and over to gift cannabis to one another up to 1 ounce, and allow adults over 21 to cultivate up to 6 plants. And, I know you've been in this fight for a really long time for cannabis reform here in Hawaii. Why do you think those provisions are really important and are really impactful in this legislation?
I started speaking out on cannabis reforms back in 2004 when I worked with the Drug Policy Alliance in Sacramento. And that's back when medical cannabis used to be really controversial. And as we look at, how adult use legalization has progressed across the states, the decriminalization of simple possession is critically important. Hawaii in 2019 passed a law that decriminalized, less than 1/8 of an ounce. It was intentionally put at less than 1/8. And, we've seen that, during the pandemic that possession arrests have decreased a little bit. The data is incomplete. It only includes Oahu County right now. But possession of up to 1 ounce is a good start. I think it should be increased substantially to up to 4 ounces, which is what is allowed currently under our medical cannabis statutes. The gifting is also good. It can, provide, some people can, support one another if they need. Home grow is very important with respect to, home cultivation. It's especially important for our rural communities, people who, may not have, quick and easy access to go to, one of the potential retail dispensary sites under this bill, under an adult use market. There's some other things that require taking a look at, maybe not this year, but potentially next year. There are going to be landlord-tenant issues that can emerge, particularly for people who want, to have a grow closet. It doesn't seem like we're going to allow that right now. And the employment protection situation is a really tough one that needs to be addressed substantially. In my view, we can't. 5 years ago, we had a legislative working group explicitly providing for employment protections for medical cannabis patients. And we're 5 years later, we still haven't gotten there for our medical cannabis patients. And, if you're going to lose your job because you're using cannabis in medical or adult use, how much liberty is there if you don't have the right to livelihood if you consume cannabis? We do not see that with other substances, including alcohol. We don't see it with tobacco either. So employment protections is a very big issue, and we had 2 vehicles talking about employment protections, but it didn't get heard in either the House or the Senate side. And mahalo to Representative Capella for introducing a bill on that front.
Yeah. So I know you served on the dual use task force this summer, and you participated in the social equity group. There's a number of folks who say the bill doesn't go far enough on equity, at least in terms of the market features. I guess, where do you see the bill's strengths in terms of social equity, and where do you see some issues, some places where you think the bill could be strengthened to really honor the recommendations of the dual use task force?
When we talk about social equity, it always has to be grounded in an acknowledgement of the very serious harms that drug law enforcement has wrought upon impacted communities. And here in Hawaii, Native Hawaiians have been, have been the targets of our criminal legal system since the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of the Republic of Hawaii. Um, and we and all of the social equity needs to bear that in mind, and it needs to be upfront and really explicit about that. Um, this bill, in my view, doesn't go far enough with respect to social equity. I think one real way it can be strengthened is not just to have organizations like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands on a social equity task force. In my view, those organizations need to be part of the regulatory authority to ensure that we have Native Hawaiian participation in a prospective adult use market that includes cannabis tourism. I also believe that this bill very importantly diversifies the numbers of the licensing right now. So it really decreases sort of the vertical integration that's currently the case in our medical cannabis market. It does advantage existing dispensaries for at least a few years. Some may argue that we need to break that out of the gate, but I think we can have a regulatory authority that will ensure that we move towards something like that includes a craft cannabis model where individual producers are not only allowed to go into business with those who are engaged in retail sales at the outset, but ultimately also have room for direct consumer sales at some point. We have such a tremendous opportunity here in Hawaii, given the knowledge and expertise of so many in our legacy market, and it's an untapped resource, and it will provide benefits in every island community, from Kauai to Molokai to maybe Lanai, but I don't know where is Larry Ellison on cannabis. I don't know, but particularly on the Big Island, we have a lot of folks in the community there who've been growing high quality cannabis for a long time. So the key is, how can we integrate what's already going on into a regulated and beneficial adult use market.
Yeah.
Also, another thing that we can talk about with respect to social equity is that we need to help ensure participation of those who've been convicted of cannabis offenses, and not just possession offenses. People have gotten tagged for cannabis cultivation, and that's it's considered to be a very serious crime here.
Yeah.
In terms of felonies, and those people should not be precluded from participation in an adult use market.
I don't think the bill precludes them currently.
I don't think so either. But again, when we talk about social equity, things have to be acknowledged and named.
I hear that.
And to the extent that cannabis prohibition has stigmatized people for growing cannabis, criminalization is the most severe and lasting stigma there is. And if you've been tagged for growing cannabis, and you should obviously not be precluded from that. And I think that sometimes things just need to be acknowledged, even though the current bill says, well, it doesn't summarily preclude people. Maybe that doesn't have to be in statutory language, but that should definitely be policy of the regulatory authority.
Sure. How do you think lawmakers and legislative leaders are wrapping their heads around the concept of social equity? I know it's a relatively new policy feature. It's kind of rolled out. It's been around for less than a decade, even though cannabis has been legalized for just a little bit over a decade. The first state to legalize was in 2012. And so I guess how do you see policymakers really wrapping their heads around this relatively new policy feature, and how important it is to cannabis policy?
I don't think they have a good understanding because we haven't really talked about it openly enough. I was very heartened that the chair of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, Senator Jared Keohokalole from the Windward Coast of Oahu, recognizes, that Native Hawaiians have been, the targets of our state's criminal legal system, and he also understands the importance of diversifying the licensures of it, the many kinds of licenses available to participate in the cannabis marketplace. So, putting the restriction on in terms of square footage on grow operations, that's beneficial. It does show some understanding, but it's a conversation that needs to continually be had, because I think the end goal of a just and equitable adult use cannabis market is broad participation from our rural communities and broad participation from those, from our Native Hawaiian communities and those who have been impacted by, a failed many decades long drug war. And to the extent we can center those people more than, the law enforcement community who, will feel sidelined. But hey, you've had at least 5 decades of anti-cannabis enforcement. Now it's time for us as a polity and as a community and as a state to move beyond prohibition and to embrace, what this state has to offer.
Yeah, right on. Well said. I know we're at a critical point in the legislative session, and it's kind of do or die. What do you think it means, or what do you think happens if we don't move this bill this year? If we don't get a legalization bill through this year, what do you think the end result is, and why do you think it's important, or if you think it's important that we take action, or that Hawaii takes that action this year?
I think at bare minimum, we need a hearing in the House very quickly. The House Health Committee is chaired by Representative Belatti. She's worked around cannabis issues for over a decade now in the legislative process. Uh, so the House needs to determine what are those areas that require additional refinement and attention, and perhaps offer amendments. I think we're in a position now where the House needs to sort of step up. Indications are there's a majority of people who favor legalization in the Democratic caucus, and maybe a vote or two in the Republican caucus. So we need to keep adult use and a proper adult use in the fore of what's being discussed in the Capitol. Um, we're gonna we're gonna risk losing it if we just kind of keep kicking the can down the road, and that's been the case for so many things. For example, employment protections for medical cannabis patients. We have the AG who had a study group after the decriminalization measure in 2019. We think that it met. It certainly didn't produce anything. The community wasn't involved in any way. We have a senator who's calling for another study group, but that's law enforcement centered. No, they already had a task force. It's time to start talking policy. We have a Honolulu prosecutor who's recycling Reagan Bush bromides in the gateway and making very thin claims about potency. And public education is important. Let's talk about impact on youth. The fact that in 2019 the CDC found that Colorado, Oregon, and Washington did not have increase in adult use rates after legalization. The traffic issue, because of the metabolites, fat soluble metabolites, stay in your body for up to a month. THC involved. Association is not causation.
Right.
Canada saw reductions in alcohol consumption. Alcohol is a big problem in this state. And to the extent that people can move from alcohol to cannabis, that's better for public health. So, the advertiser, for example, recently said that this bill shouldn't move forward because of the impact on youth. Well, excuse me, where has the star advertiser been in calling for treatment upon demand for substance use disorder and for comprehensive substance use education regarding cannabis, alcohol, and other drugs? So there's a whole paradigm shift that's needed here in our state, in not just cannabis policy, but in the way we treat alcohol education and prevent drug and alcohol and other drug education and prevention, and substance use generally, and access to treatment for those who need it.
Right on, right on. Well, Nikos, thank you so much for your insights and for your advocacy. We're certainly going to keep pushing together to try to get some comprehensive changes into the bill. Anything else you want to share before we switch over?
No, I think
Okay.
I've said my piece. I look forward to an ongoing conversation, and I see that there are a lot of comments in our chat room. So mahalo to everybody for attending and for engaging.
Yeah, for the folks who are leaving comments, I can't see them through the platform, but we are going to have an opportunity where I'm going to take a couple questions. So keep sending them, keep engaging, and I appreciate you all for attending. And so I want to, Nikos talked about the data we have for arrest rates even after Hawaii implemented decriminalization of cannabis up to 3 grams. And the data shows it's a bit incomplete, but the data shows that there were still hundreds of people arrested in Honolulu County in the year after Hawaii adopted the decriminalization of cannabis. And so, we're talking about when we're looking at those stats, we're talking about a couple of things. It's one, the lives of folks that are impacted, that have to interact with law enforcement, that potentially have the scarlet letter of a conviction on their record that prevents them from upward mobility. And we're also talking about the drain on public resources, the fact that we have our police force spending precious time and resources on a nonviolent crime, and in most folks' eyes, a victimless crime, as long as you're not selling cannabis to minors. And so I think those two things are really important to keep in mind. That even after decriminalization, there were still, just in Honolulu County, a few hundred people who were continued to be criminalized and prosecuted for cannabis, and now we're some of them now wear that stain of a conviction on their record. And so to kind of hammer home on the expungement provisions on the bill and what they really mean, I want to bring on Frank Stifel of the Last Prisoner Project to talk a little bit. Hey, Frank.
Hey, Devon. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us. I just want to give a brief intro. Frank Stifel is a senior policy associate with the Last Prisoner Project. Frank's work at LPP focuses on legislation that redresses the harms caused by cannabis prohibition, specifically working with stakeholders across the country to pass and implement bills that will provide release for individuals still incarcerated for cannabis and automatically clear cannabis records. Frank, thanks so much again for joining us. And I want to dive into the expungement provisions of SB 669. I know you've been engaged in other states doing this work. And so just kind of quickly to get at it, on your read as SB 669 stands, what does it currently do?
Yeah, so I think we're just at the top, super thrilled, to see the language in SB 669 related to record clearance. The Last Prisoner Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit that is focused on cannabis-related criminal justice reform across the country. And so obviously when a state legalizes adult use cannabis, it doesn't always mean that every person that is incarcerated or under community supervision for a cannabis-related offense is going to be released now that what they were sentenced for has been legalized. And the same goes with clearing individuals' criminal records. And so our work with LPP is to provide technical assistance to states to ensure that when they legalize, they are simultaneously implementing these systems of retroactive relief, like automatic record clearance process that is outlined in SB 669. And so we were, again, like I said, super thrilled to see that the legislation actually followed through on the recommendations that we had made this past year through our work with the Dual Use of Cannabis Task Force to create this automatic record clearance process. And so I think you went over a lot of the details of the bill already as it pertains to record clearance. So, it states that, by December 31st, 2025, the Attorney General and the judiciary must determine the offenses that are eligible for expungement. And then the county attorneys must then issue written notices to all persons that are eligible for expungement. And then no later than January 1st of 2026, the Attorney General must then order the automatic expungement of those records of arrest, criminal charges, convictions of cannabis offenses. And as you mentioned, once a record is expunged, the legislation states that an individual can say that they've never been convicted of a crime. And that's obviously a huge piece to ensure that individuals no longer experience the collateral consequences associated with having a criminal record, for any of the ways in which they could have gotten involved in the criminal justice system via cannabis. And so we, like I said, we're super thrilled with the legislation. I'm more than happy to talk a little bit about how it could be beefed up, once it heads over to the House side, if you'd like, and then also to talk about the resentencing stuff.
Yeah, I want to get into that, but I want to kind of stay on the stuff you just mentioned. Is it common, in the states that you've seen, is it a thing out the gate to do expungement for cannabis sales? I know that's been a contentious issue in some states, and this bill does include cannabis sales, and it doesn't set a limit on the amount.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess where does that kind of fare on the scale of expungement policies?
No, it's definitely, I think, more progressive than we've seen in other states. I would just highlight a bill, for example, in Minnesota that is now likely to pass, that includes automatic expungement. But, a lot of felony convictions, cannabis convictions, might not actually be included in that automatic record clearance process that's being envisioned in Minnesota. And that's something that we've, talked to legislators in Minnesota about is, hey, you should really consider expanding, right, the eligibility for this automatic record clearance process to include, like you had mentioned, some of those sales convictions as well. And so I think, Hawaii definitely seems to be leaning towards the progressive end of as far as increasing eligibility for the automatic record clearance process, for sure.
Right, and just to be clear, is there a limit on the amount in the bill? On it just says, I don't know if our tech assistant can actually share the language. If that might be helpful right now. Okay, great. So here it is. It says records relating to the arrest, criminal charge, or conviction of a person for an offense under Chapter 329, the basis of which is an act permitted by Chapter A. And just to review, Chapter A allows personal use, so up to 1 ounce, and it also, Chapter A covers sales. So any record related to, what's now legal conduct, which is, cultivation, sale, testing, distribution, and the personal use provisions, any of those offenses, and any of those records, including, it says right here, in the first paragraph, including the possession or distribution of marijuana, shall be ordered expunged in accordance with the provisions of this section. And so, so
it's really good language. It's very good language. Yeah, just to be straightforward, it's really good language. I think honestly, our biggest piece of or what we would want to see improved is just, I think, to ensure that there are I think a little bit more. There's some more language around like reporting mechanisms, right? So in states like, for example, in California that had created an automatic record clearance process, there wasn't, a great and thorough process to regularly update the legislature and the public around the process of sealing records, right? And so what you saw in California is that a lot of folks didn't end up, getting their records sealed in a timely manner. And so I would just recommend that the legislature, and folks in the House, when the bill, is obviously now on their side, to really look at including some language just to beef up the reporting requirements to ensure that the process runs smoothly.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on, you talked about a little bit, where do you think, it could be really beefed up? And maybe you can touch on how do you think are some strategies folks can implement to get there, to get, more stronger things into the expungement provisions of the bill?
Yeah, so like I said, I think the expungement provisions are quite good as is. I would, I think I think some of the improvements could be, the fact that, like, I think looking at potential criteria for ineligibility and limiting that as much as possible. In instances where information, related to a cannabis criminal record is missing or otherwise not available, we would say that the state should presume that the record is eligible and move on with that automatic record clearance process. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just including those transparency and reporting requirements to ensure that the automatic record clearance process for those qualifying cannabis offenses is implemented with fidelity and in accordance with the law. So I think those are really the ways in which this bill could be beefed up a little bit and really get right. I would say, like, right now the bill is like at an A or an A minus, and to get up to the A plus and that gold standard, right, is the way is that language could be included. I would say and this is really important, and this is something that we talked about a lot with the dual use of cannabis task force earlier this year, is resentencing. And it is really important that this bill includes some mechanism, a process for resentencing, right? We know that there are many individuals in Hawaii that are, incarcerated or on supervision for a cannabis-related offense and a cannabis-related sentence, excuse me. So what we would really encourage is that the members of the House really look at creating an automatic resentencing process to ensure that individuals who have been incarcerated or who are on supervision for a cannabis-related offense have the opportunity. We're not saying that those people should be automatically released, but they should at least be given an opportunity to be heard by a judge to hear about, why they were sentenced, what offense led to that sentencing, and have, and make sure that they are being considered for resentencing. Right now, the bill does allow for folks to petition for resentencing, which is great, but it's not. I think we've seen that is very prohibitive for folks that are incarcerated or who are under supervision. And so, the best way to ensure that those folks can actually, receive retroactive relief is that the state initiates the process, right? So the state is identifying those cannabis-related sentences for folks that are incarcerated or are under supervision, and they're scheduling those folks for hearings in front of the court that they were sentenced for their case to be reconsidered.
Awesome. So lastly, I just want to talk about kind of a little bit of the work that you all, LPP has done in the past, and kind of what, if enacted, this expungement provision, if we get it through the House, what does it mean? What would it mean for the state of Hawaii? What would it mean? And what kind of results have you seen in other states through similar legislation?
Yeah, I mean, the best example I can give you is, there are tens of thousands of individuals in California that received, retroactive relief through the record clearance law that was passed in 2018. And then obviously the new bill that beefed up that process and ensured that there were some accountability mechanisms this past year. And so, like I said, tens of thousands of folks will receive that record clearance relief in California due to, that law being passed. And we've seen that in countless other states. There are thousands of individuals that might not even be aware of the fact that they have a cannabis, a cannabis record. And so that is why having an automatic process is so important, and that folks are actually notified, right, that their cannabis record has been sealed, so that when they're applying for a job, when they're trying to obtain different types of services, right, they're not exposing themselves or the fact that they have a possibly a cannabis record, a criminal record, that would endanger them to not receive that job or not receive any sort of services or benefits that they should really be entitled to. And so I think I would say that Hawaii, this is a trend that we're now seeing in many states as far as including this automatic record clearance. Rhode Island included it in their law and their legalization package this past year. We're seeing it in Minnesota, like I mentioned, in their legislation. California obviously did it. There are countless other states that have included an automatic record clearance process. And what I would say, to folks in Hawaii and to the Hawaii legislature is, y'all have a really great opportunity to set the bar even higher and to really lead by example as far as beefing up, a little bit of that record clearance language, but then also including that resentencing language. And that is really key and important to ensure, that every individual that is incarcerated, that is in prison, that is being, thrust into the criminal justice system for a cannabis, related sentence, is actually receiving the relief that they obviously deserve.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we're going to keep on pushing together in this fight for restorative justice for folks here in Hawaii. So thank you for joining us.
Of course, yeah, happy to join y'all. Thanks.
Yeah. So I do want to go back and maybe talk a little bit about. Actually, I won't refer to any of the slides, but I think Frank touched on it. The immediately prior to me coming, returning to Hawaii to work on this issue, I was deeply involved in Connecticut, where through automatic expungement, they were able to expunge over 40,000 records, and some of them were automatic. And I was fortunate enough to receive some emails from folks who had their records expunged automatically, who weren't aware, that the process was even ongoing, and the tremendous impact that had on their lives. And so, with the provisions in the bill as is, the fact that it would allow for the erase of arrest records and convictions for any conduct that's permitted, or was the basis of, or permitted in Section A of the bill, I think is really monumental, especially considering, the historical impact of cannabis prohibition here in Hawaii. The fact that, tens of thousands of folks' lives were upended because of prohibition. And as the bill stands right now, it would give those folks an opportunity to have their records expunged and be able to apply for licenses, for better housing opportunities. I think that's something that we cannot lose sight of, that provision is in the bill, and it's such an important provision. And I think just a couple tweaks to that section could really make it strong, and maybe clarify some of the issues that other advocates are thinking maybe a little bit vague or outstanding. And so I think what we have right now is solid, as Frank said, but I think we can certainly push for more. And so kind of keeping in that trend of just really kind of understanding the magnitude and the gravity of what an expungement program of that magnitude that's envisioned in 669 would mean for the state. I want to bring on the new executive director for ACLU Hawaii, Scott Greenwood. Hey, Scott.
Hey, greetings, Devon. Aloha.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Aloha. Just give a brief introduction. The ACLU Hawaii it's a private nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's been protecting the civil rights and civil liberties of the Hawaiian Islands, Guam, and American Samoa since its inception in 1965. Scott, I know you've been out here working with the ACLU in Hawaii for a couple of months, but you've been with the organization, the ACLU, nationally for a couple decades. And so really, really stoked to have you here, and really stoked to have you talk about this issue. And so I'll dive right in and kind of pick up where I left off, talking about the expungement provisions. I know the ACLU in other states and in Hawaii are supporting this bill. What would an expungement program of this magnitude that's envisioned in 669 mean for the state of Hawaii if implemented?
So I want to start by thanking you for having me on this evening, and also for the really informed discussion and respectful discussion that we're having here today, because we really are at a threshold and a reflection point here. This is the best opportunity that we have in this state to secure personal use legislation and decriminalization, and simultaneously to do large-scale criminal justice reform all in one package. Is the current iteration of the bill perfect? No, but it's about 90% of the way there. So one of the most important components to the bill that got put back in, really, after the other pieces of legislation did not move forward, are the social equity and social justice components. So expungement on the order that we're talking about in this bill would be incredibly meaningful for criminal justice reform in Hawaii. It'll by doing two different things. First, by retroactively expunging and clearing records of people who have certain types of offenses that everybody would agree, including people in the law enforcement community, are relatively low-level offenses for which they were convicted. Possession, use, display, cultivation, not trafficking, not running a giant grow farm somewhere, but things that really are in the nature of personal offenses. So those types of offenses can be cleared under the current iteration of the bill in ways that are relatively easy, somewhat akin to the types of restorations that we're already doing in Hawaii with driver's licenses with administrative holders on them. So it's under the bill, it would really be up to the regulatory authority to flesh out some of the regulations, into the Attorney General's office to determine which offenses would qualify for expungement. The other thing that that this bill will do is prevent expungement from needing to occur at all by diverting huge numbers of people from the criminal justice system before they even enter it. And both of these really are meaningful. So both restoring people's pre-conviction statuses will enable members of the community, particularly in impacted communities like Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, and other people of color, as well as socioeconomically disadvantaged folks. It will enable them to clear the decks and to participate more fully in our society without having these past convictions continue to loom over them. And I just can't overstate the importance of that to what that can be in somebody's life. Having the freedom, the liberty to indicate that there's not been a conviction ever, right, because it's been expunged, will make the difference for tens of thousands of people who have been impacted in jobs and housing opportunities, and in terms of how they may interact with the child welfare system, other actions in the criminal system. Just rules out by removing this thing many people would consider to be a stain that was really indicative of a failed prohibition era. As I think Nico said, well, we've tried prohibition. It doesn't work. This is consistent with personal liberty, personal freedom, and with best practices in criminal justice reform. I have spent time in my career just in the last decade on these efforts in other locations. And one of the more interesting sets of allies around this issue when I did this work in Ohio was an alliance between probably the toughest on crime prosecutor and law enforcement folks as well, including police chiefs, as well as civil rights and civil liberties advocates. They recognize the tremendous social costs that a prohibition system creates. So in Hawaii, we currently spend tens of millions of dollars annually incarcerating, prosecuting, and dealing with the effects in the criminal justice system of people for cannabis offenses. And there simply is a much better use for those resources.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation online about the expungement provision, specifically about the AG's role in the expungement, right? And you know, Scott, do you have done this work in other states and haven't been involved here in Hawaii? Do you have any insight onto why the AG has a role in this bill and how much discretion or does the AG have under the way the bill is drafted to expunge certain offenses or not? And can you kind of speak to the role of the AG in the expungement process in the bill?
Sure. I mean, the AG, so in Hawaii, the Attorney General is not a separately constitutionally elected officer. The Attorney General is appointed by the governor, who will act under the governor's authority. And so I would say that the AG doesn't have a whole lot of discretion. This is an area in the legislation that could certainly be beefed up. and fleshed out with more specific citations in the legislation itself, and which types of past convictions would either automatically be considered expungable or could automatically be cleared. And I certainly recommend and work with anybody in the legislature who would like to do that in any type of an amendment. That is the single, I would say, problematic part of this bill. But this really does get us about 90% of the way there. The other principal complaint that I've heard people make is that it's not specific enough about specific metrics that would be used by the cannabis authority that is created here. Well, the entity that's created is already involved in regulating the medical end of cannabis cultivation and distribution. And I'm quite capable that they'll be able to implement this on a trial basis as the administrative rules are determined during the pilot program.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I guess, having done this, and been pushing for cannabis reform in other states, what advice could you give to other advocates and stakeholders who are trying to get, good friendly amendments into this bill, things that would, benefit the public, benefit the larger cannabis community? What advice would you give to those folks on how to best go about getting those changes into the bill?
So first, let's not pick the enemy of the good here. This is a good bill. It is the last one standing, and so it is the best opportunity in this legislative session to achieve what so many people have worked for so long to do, and that will impact in a really positive way criminal justice reform almost immediately in this state. So to the extent legislation can be improved, people should contact their legislators, particularly the sponsors of the bill and the folks who are in the House, who are in positions on the committees to which the legislation has been referred, to make this a little bit stronger. Standing offer from the ACLU to the speaker and to the leadership is to work with them and with their chosen legislators to vet and to create the type of language that ought to go into amendments that make these things more clear, so that there is a high comfort level in that caucus as they move forward. Because I am confident that with the overwhelming public support for legalization and decriminalization, this is the year to move forward. And let's do that in a way that achieves these criminal justice reform, as well as enhances people's individual autonomy and liberty. Because there's no reason at this point in time Hawaii should not be the latest state that moves in that direction. 30 states already decriminalize, plus the District of Columbia already criminalize and permit and have some medical regulatory scheme, and approximately half of the states some personal use provisions now. There's no reason why we need to reinvent the wheel here. There are lots of systems that work quite well at this point in time, and we can borrow aspects of them to tweak this legislation so that it becomes really the leading cannabis legalization package in the country.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, Scott, can you stick around for a couple minutes? I'm going to take some questions from folks here in the comment section while we have a couple more minutes. I don't want to hold anybody over an hour. We've been at this for a little bit. So let me see if does anybody have any pressing questions that I can answer, or have any one of our esteemed panelists speak to. Let me look back through the comments and see if there is anything. Hey, Scott, would you mind sharing your contact? I see some folks in here would like to reach out to you. How can folks best get in touch with you over at the ACLU?
So the best way people can reach me directly at the ACLU is at sgreenwood, GREENWOOD, at acluhawaii.org. Again, that's sgreenwood@acouhawaii.org. Or alternately, you can call the office at 808-688-5900.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Nikos, can you share? If folks want to reach out to you, can you share your contact as well? You don't think you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm used to Zoom. My email, the best email to reach me is my work email, nleverenz, NLEVERENZ @hhhrc.org. You can also DM me on Twitter too. So, and I'll give out my cell when we start having conversations. And I look for, I already have been having conversations with people in the comments. So I look forward to continually connecting with folks in the community.
Yeah.
And we need more input from our neighbor island folks too. Yeah. Always.
I see my good friend Kaliko from in the comments, and he has a great question. He says, what are the provisions that focus on Native Hawaiians, and are there licensing set asides and incentives for them? And Kaliko, I think that's a phenomenal question. I think I will say it's something that I've referred to or asked lawmakers to include. The definition of social equity that I recommended, or not me, just MPP recommended to lawmakers, was to make the definition of social equity anybody who has a cannabis conviction in the state of Hawaii, and anybody who is a Native Hawaiian as defined in Hawaii General Statute. I think those should be two automatic equity qualifiers. Those are two things that I'm pushing for, and I would love to see the whole host of opportunities available to social equity applicants, including specific set asides. I'd love to see a revolving loan fund that was included in a prior draft of the legislation. I'd love to see priority in licensing like they have in New Jersey. All of those things are the gamut of social equity features that I'd love to see. I think, and that's what I've recommended in my line item suggested amendments to lawmakers. And I think if we stay at it, we can all make that happen. But it's something that's certainly missing from the bill right now. And I will say that it's missing explicitly, but the bill does give the opportunity for the authority to develop those things. It's under their broad powers. It's not explicitly in there, and I think it could be stronger, but it doesn't preclude them from doing it later either. And Scott or Nikos, if either one of you wanted to touch on that question.
If I can jump in here.
Go ahead, Nikos. You first, Scott.
Okay. So one thing that we know in this state, like in every other state, is that marijuana prohibition disproportionately impacts in the criminal justice system people of color. And in Hawaii, it disproportionately has impacted and continues to impact Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and other people of color. If you look at the National ACLU's website, which is aclu.org, under reform or under drug reform, you will see a report, and I think somebody had comments way back. You'll see a report on the enormous racial disparities that exist in the current prohibition systems and how it rules through the system. Because people who are in these categories or these demographics are so overrepresented in the prohibition system, it is only right and equitable that when it comes to clearing the deck and adjusting into a legalization and regulation system, that people have been historically much more impacted negatively have greater opportunities to participate in the system. We don't want to stand companies that are just conglomerates where people like, and I'm using real life examples for people I personally know, where John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, who had been a lifelong prohibitionist until he joined the board of a cannabis company after leaving service as Speaker of the House, or Terry Gaynor, who had been Senate's First, he had been chief of the Capitol Police. He was the Senate sergeant at arms. In other words, he's running their internal police as well. You don't want to see people from background coming into and running and being at high levels in a conglomerate type of corporate, solely corporate ownership system. You want to create avenues and create incentives for people from the most impacted communities to participate in a legalization and regulatory scheme.
Nico, you were going to add something?
I would basically sort of reiterate what I said earlier, and I think it bears repeating that Native Hawaiian organizations should be at the table in terms of the regulatory authority to help ensure that the Native Hawaiian communities on each island are at least given a voice. I would encourage people to contact their OHA representatives and to start, talking about the need for OHA to speak publicly about this issue and to demand a seat at the table. I think that as we move along the road, there are ways that the regulatory authority can help support, craft cannabis, including potentially direct-to-consumer sales for smaller growers who want to develop, their own cultivars and kind of interface with their own community and maybe some visitors as well. So, we have great opportunities here to really repair the harm of cannabis prohibition and other drug law enforcement in moving toward, a shared prosperity model.
Yeah, I think I think Representative Capella touched on it, but I think folks get caught in this narrative sometimes between should we support a bill or should we strongly oppose it and try to kill the bill, and I really think that just misstates the process. We have, if this bill gets scheduled for a hearing, we're going to have 3 opportunities to add in more amendments, and so I think the consensus for everybody is the bill's a solid start, but it could certainly go farther. And to the advocates, I see a lot of folks in the comments. I would really encourage folks to read through the testimony. I know ACLU submitted testimony. I know Drug Policy Forum Hawaii submitted testimony. MPP submitted very lengthy testimony, which echoes the things I talked about in terms of seeing Native Hawaiians qualify as a social equity qualifier, and some of the people we'd like to see on the regulatory board. So we really encourage folks to look at the testimony, see where folks are aligned, because I think we all really are aligned on a lot of these crucial issues, and really just take up the advice of everybody who talked here tonight and contact their lawmakers, contact their OHA representatives, and really start to get the stakeholders and larger community engaged. Making law, as Nikos and Scott know, is folks define it as making sausage, and it's a long, lengthy process. And so we're going through it. And so I just really huge mahalo to both of you for being here tonight and for engaging with us. And thank you everybody in the comments. I appreciate you all tuning in and really engaging, because your opinion and your voices really do matter to this conversation, and we can't do this without your advocacy. So really want to thank everybody for joining us. This video is going to be made available on our MPP page for folks who may have missed it or want to go back through and review it. It'll be up on our MPP page for forever. So feel free to take a look, and feel free to reach out to any one of us at our emails. My email is dward@mpp.org. And again, thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and hui hou. See you soon.